Monday night's a good night. Any night's a good night to talk college football. Right here at the Voice of College Football. Welcome in. We will, of course, take your comments and your questions right there in the live chat. And the phone lines are open and will be open. 860-499-3332. I will post the number on the ticker below here very soon. Hope everyone's having a good night tonight on a Monday night after a tremendous weekend of college football. And that is my subject of the night. When is the last time we experienced a month like we just experienced here this month in September of 2021 concerning the landscape of college football? We're going to talk about what it looked like a month ago, what we expected, what we anticipated, and what we got, and what that has set the stage for. Most of us were talking about 5 teams, maybe 6, 7, or 8, but basically 5 teams contending for a college football national championship. A month ago, we were talking about Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, Ohio State, and Oklahoma having a serious run at a national championship. Then we were talking about on the periphery, North Carolina, Iowa State, maybe Oregon having a shot to get to the college football playoff. That was it. That was it. And who can we possibly talk about 1 month later having a legit shot to get to the college football playoff? We'll talk about it with you. Please join us on Patreon, Voice of College Football Community. Voice of College Football Community on Patreon. Just go to Patreon, search MarkRogersTV, or simply go to the description section of any of our videos, and near the top of that description section, it will say Patreon in big caps, and just grab that link and go to Patreon, search MarkRogersTV, $5 a month, 17 cents per day, gets you my predictions, in which I'm 59-36 against the spread this season, 59-36 against the spread. I'll have to do some math to figure out my selections against the money line. I believe I'm 69-22 against the money line, coming off a rough week of only 12-7 against the money line. But we also have the selections from 20 media members. So check those out as well. 20 media members join me in our predictions. We compete on a 12-pack each week, and then you get my selections on the top 25, which is like 25 games each and every week. Steve Merrill joins us each and every week as well from Wager Talk and from Pro Sports Info with his under-the-radar selection of the week, which he slammed with no issues this past week when he said Texas Tech, take the over, and they scored 105 points. And then, of course, you get an insider look at the Voice of College Football, and I will admit, I'm always upfront and honest with all of you. I have not done a good job in like the last 4 or 5 months in regards to giving you an insider look. I don't know that anybody's interested in an insider look other than the people that originally had told me, hey, Mark, that's what you should give us on Patreon. So my apologies there on the insider look. And there's always an offer out there for everybody on Patreon, an exclusive live stream each week, per request. So join us on Patreon. Also, if you would like to write for us here at the Voice of College Football, then go to voiceofcollegefootball.com and just go to the top of the screen where it says write for us. Isn't that clever? Write for us at the top of the screen on voiceofcollegefootball.com, and you'll be in contact with me, and we will go from there. Also, check out the gear that we've got available, whether that be for your football Saturdays, just a ton of different items, gear, apparel, household items, college football related. Pick your team and go to voiceofcollegefootball.com, and you can select by item or you can select by team. Just go to the top of the page there at voiceofcollegefootball.com and hit store. Let me get to your comments. And of course, let's talk about college football, where it stands here on September 27th, 2021 versus, let's say, August 27th, 2021, which was conveniently one day before the first games of the season. Illinois, Nebraska, and UCLA and Hawaii. Hey, Michael, good to see you. If the season ended right now, I have to say Arkansas, Alabama, Cincinnati, Georgia would be the 4 playoff teams. And I throw Penn State in the mix outside the bubble. Arkansas, Alabama, Cincinnati, Georgia would be Michael's 4 right now. Right now. George, I'm pretty sure Florida is the answer to that question. The question of who now is a college football national championship contender was not a few weeks ago, is now. Appreciate that, Mal. Thank you so much. Good to see you. Good to see you, Mr. HD. Support the vision, support Mark Rogers, support the voice of college football. And there's a number of ways you can do that. You can just start by smashing that like button. You can check out our other videos, of course. Check out our other team channels. Any channels that we've got that are not yet at 1,000 subscribers, and that's many of them. Notre Dame, Alabama, Texas A&M, LSU, Florida. Many of our channels not quite at 1,000 subscribers, in the 300 to 400, 500, 600 range. We could use subscribers to get us to 1,000. 1,000 is key. All right, we've got One Scoop John. Eagles just got whooped. Jalen made a crazy throw at the end, though. I see good things for him in the future. It was interesting during the Eagles-Cowboys game that Jalen Hurts threw a pick six that was intended for Devontae Freeman that was intercepted by Trayvon Diggs. Alabama passer, receiver, DB, pick six. Hey, Sue. Good to see you. As always, you know that. Oh, we got George on hold already. The calls are mounting. I haven't even really introed the show yet. That's all right. Welcome to the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
Hey, it's George.
It is George. I recognize your voice, believe it or not.
I wanted to say George in Portland, but I don't know. Do I need to say that?
Well, you know, I would like, it would be kind of cool to put a little banner at the bottom of the screen every time somebody calls, and it would say George from Portland. Right? That could be the next addition to the show.
Oh my God. I'm talking to people in the chat. They can hear me. They know. I'm not answering none of you guys right now. I'm on the phone.
Let's see. On the line, I'm working on this right as we speak. On the line, George from Portland. Portland, it would spell Portland, right? And there it is.
Somebody smells cooking bacon. It don't get no better than that.
What's baking?
Somebody in the chat said, I smell bacon cooking. That's like a joke, like the chat.
Yeah. I got you.
Good stuff, man.
Yeah, we're cooking with grease, as they say. I've never said that before, but I guess now I have.
This guy that is named Exploring with Ben, he just said, my hometown is Gresham, George. That's like a suburb of Portland.
Oh, okay.
I don't know where he's at right now.
You guys are up there in the corner of the country. You guys can hang out.
He's an Oregon Ducks fan, and he just said something like he'd like to see the Ducks play Georgia. And I said, we would all be happy to believe in you as soon as you win a national title. That's fair, isn't it?
Maybe they'll play Oregon in the national championship game.
or just play them. Period. I think they're asking for Georgia. Like, I don't think you want Georgia. Please pick someone else. That would be embarrassing. It would be Georgia 50, Oregon 0.
50-0.
You think they would have learned after they played Auburn last time, and our offensive linemen are twice as big as their offensive linemen. It's not a fair game.
Well, you do know, George, that it took Auburn until the last play of the game to beat Oregon. It wasn't quite 50-0.
I know that, but I watched the game and I never felt threatened. You know,
never felt threatened.
Auburn.
Oregon was winning the whole game.
No. I never felt threatened. I have no respect for Oregon. I wasn't worried at all, ever.
Oh, okay.
They've never won anything, and the trend continues.
I can't argue with that. Depending on what you mean by everything, right. They've never won anything. You're not a big believer in the Pac-12 championship, huh?
I'm trying to think of something. I just can't think of anything. Oregon State wins something once in a while. They win baseball once in a while. I don't think Oregon ever won anything ever.
They won the Rose Bowl 2 years ago.
Come on. It's not 1960. No one cares about the Rose Bowl anymore.
See, that's my point, though. We're trying to change thinking around here, George. That's part of my calling here.
Anyway, Florida is a dark horse for the national title. We're up there with Georgia and Alabama and Arkansas. Am I missing anybody in the Southeast Conference?
You lost a game.
Hey, what?
Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Arkansas. I'll go with those four. Okay.
What's going to happen if Texas A&M and LSU don't lose another game this year? I mean, this is a hell of a conference, man. Anything can happen. You got to be on your toes every week. Even Kentucky, you know.
Kentucky's undefeated.
That's like
playing your Gators.
Kentucky's like playing Arkansas. We better not fool around. Yeah, Mark, I think we might win the national title this year, just like LSU did, out of the blue. Nobody picked them. Nobody thought Joe Burrows could be that good, but we have Anthony Richardson, and Emory Jones is doing good now. So between the two of them, I think that there's a slight chance. There's a slight chance there. We could just run over everybody.
George, I enjoy your faith. I enjoy your hope, your faith, your belief in your team. It's encouraging.
I see it coming. I'd rather be us than anybody else if I could choose a team. I like our team. I like our players. I like our depth. I know we're a little young in the secondary, but who cares? If your defensive line is doing their job, that gives them a little help right there. And our defensive line is doing the job. So
listen to George breaking down the football for us.
I'm hyped, man. Hey, here's a little tidbit, a little nugget for the people that hate Florida. Our starting cornerback, Jaden Hill, he got injured. And then a week later, it comes out that he stole somebody's credit card and paid his traffic tickets. I'm like, I wish that young man would have talked to me before he did that. I could have explained to him why this is not going to work. You can't steal someone's credit card and pay your traffic tickets. Where is the coaching staff at times like that? You know? Aren't you supposed to be able to go to your coach and say, I need $600 for traffic tickets? What's going on in this world? What is this world coming to?
So he got suspended for a couple games?
He stole a credit card. And
what did they do to him?
I don't know, but it really fucked up our defensive backfield. I'll tell you that. I'm like, come on, Jaden. He was the starting quarterback for Florida when he did it. I blame the coaches. You're supposed to have your thumb on the pulse of the team. How can you not know Jaden Hill has 6 traffic tickets? God damn. Okay. We need more staff like Alabama has. We need more staff like Alabama has, like 800 assistants, you know?
Yeah. That 800th assistant could be in charge of, credit
following
card
Jaden
felonies.
Around.
Yeah. Or just, assign
Yeah,
to Jaden.
yeah. Get like hire a New York law firm, shadow every player, whatever you got to do. Nick Saban's doing it, obviously. Hey, LW just said George for athletic director. I think I'd fit that job good. I'm here to make executive decisions. Man, nobody can make a decision. I'd be like, give Dan Mullen 10 more million a year and shut down the tennis team. Who cares about tennis? Who's watching tennis?
Joy Hog likes your style. Joy Hog's 90. George, I like your style.
I like people named Joy. That's a pretty name.
It's a refreshing name. It's an uplifting name. Joy.
Right. And her sister is Hope.
Maybe Faith. Could be a cousin.
In Love. Yeah. It's a nice family.
All right. Well, we've got the calls stacking up, George.
Swampy.
What's your parting shot?
Swampy McGee just said, Swampy McGee gives me a hard time. I don't know why. I think he's jealous.
And your parting shot. Your parting shot, George.
I love you, Swampy. Please don't hate me.
All right, George.
All right. That's all I got.
Appreciate it.
Later.
See ya. All right. Next up here at the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
Well, I'm going to try and follow George. I know it's going to be difficult, but I think I'm going to give it a shot here.
You can
Mark,
do it.
How are you doing this evening?
I am doing well.
Okay.
And you?
Well, I'm doing well. Just want to talk a little bit of Buckeyes and a little bit of college football overall, if I may. Starting with Ohio State. And you didn't watch much of the game on Saturday, I take it, right, Mark?
I have not seen one play of that game.
Okay.
I will say this. I'm sorry to cut you off, David. I will say that I feel like I've got an obligation to at least watch Kyle McCord's 18 passes. So I will be looking for those.
Well, it started off kind of off there, Mark. So you're going to see some bad early, but it did get a little bit better later as the game goes along for what it's worth. One thing I was going to mention, and actually, Tony Gerdeman had brought up this point on his podcast, I think, a few weeks back. And, I know Ryan Day was obviously brought into Ohio State to fix the passing game after the debacle against Clemson, in the playoff that one year where they got shut out. And he came in 2017, and the passing game obviously improved. It helped that maybe Ohio State had its two best passing quarterbacks ever in Dwayne Haskins and Justin Fields. And, I said coming into the season, I thought Ohio State's season would come down to two things. Number one, how good the back seven of their defense was. And number two, what was C.J. Stroud feeling, as a quarterback, especially following what he had to follow in the previous two quarterbacks. And in looking at it, Mark, I think that, and Tony mentioned this point, the more and more I look at the Buckeyes offense right now, and I look at it closely, their best offensive player, if you had to say who the Buckeyes' best offensive player is right now, who would you say it is?
Garrett Wilson.
I would say right now it might look like Travion Henderson.
Okay.
And where I was going with this, and Tony had mentioned this, is, and I think that there's a case to be made that you always build your offense around your best offensive player. If your best offensive player is going to be your running game, you build it more around your running game as opposed towards, where if your best offensive player isn't your quarterback. Now, if your best offensive player is your quarterback, you put him in the shotgun, you spread them out with wide receivers and you let them throw the football around. I get it. But right now, I think Henderson is the Ohio State's best offensive player. And I think a case can be made that you take him, and I really like Mayan Williams too. I don't know why he's getting less carries the last couple games, because even though I think Travion Henderson is clearly their number one running back, I think Mayan Williams is clearly their number two running back. I'll take him over Master Teague any day of the week and twice on Sunday. So what I would say is I would build the offense around Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams and that offensive line and just try and run the football down people's throats. Now, I realize you can't hide your quarterback, but I I would build the offense a little bit more around the running game. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that the offensive line should be one of the top 3 or 4 units in the country. Offensive linemen love to run block. They generally don't like to pass block. So I'm thinking that these guys love to run block. And you do have 2 outstanding backs and 1 serviceable guy in Master Teague. And maybe that's downgrading him a little bit less than where I should. So I understand all that. It could be complemented by a short passing game and let Wilson, Olave, Jackson Smith, Najigba do their thing in the open field. And then, of course, you've got to stretch the field at some point. But, yeah, they have not attempted to do what every other outstanding team, top level team in the Big Ten is doing currently, and that's play run football first and foremost. I don't know what the ratios are off the top of my head, but I could guess them, I think, very close when you look at probably Penn State being the most balanced, but Iowa, Michigan being very run heavy, Michigan State as well.
Well, and I get it. We live in a day and age where you throw to set up the run rather than vice versa. You know, it used to be vice versa. Now it's the other way around in the days of the air raid offenses. And I get that. But the point that I'm making, and Ohio State's offensive line to me has looked a lot better in run blocking than they have in pass protection. So all I'm really saying here is just gravitate towards your strength. You know, if your strength is your 2 backs and your offensive line seems to be doing a better job of run blocking and they're opening up holes, now, I get it. The competition has not been great. I'll concede that. But nevertheless, you know, I just think that those are their best players, and I think their offensive line is their strength. And you can still run some play action and take your deep shots down the field to Wilson and Olave. I get that. You should do that. But I just think that putting maybe more of an emphasis on the run game, especially with those 2 backs in the line, I think it'd be a better way for them to go just getting into Big Ten play. Just something I've noticed that, you know, what. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, if you look at Florida, they've been able to transition personnel groupings and transform the offense to fit the quarterback style and do it successfully. And of course, they're still throwing the ball, but just not nearly as much as they did last season. And they've made a successful transition. And they've done that primarily because of the quarterback transition, but also because of the loss of talent at wide receiver. The only downside to that is you're then limiting the most talent-laden and most successful and high-playing group on the field on both sides of the ball.
And I understand that. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't still throw the football, but I would just be more at least to a 50-50 balance. If not, maybe tilting 55-45 to the run is what I'm saying, Mark. That's really where I was going with what I was saying. And I think that especially because 2 of their strengths are still their offensive line and still those backs, you're still playing to a pretty good strength there.
You also make it
just my thoughts.
Yep.
Good.
You also make it a time of possession game. You make time of possession, which has been minimized in its importance in recent years. You make time of possession more important, and you weigh that heavily on your side if you are running successfully versus keeping your defense off the field.
Yeah, and that would definitely help because I mean, Mark, I'm still not. I mean, I know the defense did what they did, but I'm keeping Akron U in context this week and the opponent that they played. So, and until that defense plays well against a quality opponent, I'm not going to be completely on board. I know the talent is there, obviously, but you know, obviously they still have to prove it. I think against a better opponent. And your point's well taken. If they can run the ball, control time of possession, that the defense is on the field a lot less. So I totally agree with you on that one. I wanted to get to just kind of, you know, your view of where college football is at, Mark. I don't know. I thought you had made a video. Did you make a video kind of comparing this season a little bit to 2007?
I presented that as a topic one night on a live stream.
Okay. Okay. I mean, I'm not going to go that far because we haven't seen the kind of that level of just because remember we had all those crazy upsets that year. But I do think, and I said this to you before the season, I think this season I think this season's a little bit more balanced than let's say the last 3 seasons are. I do tend to think that Alabama and Georgia are clearly the 2 best teams. But I do think, I mean, obviously they both had close football games. You know, Georgia against Clemson and then Alabama against Florida. But I do think that there's a gap, let's say, after those 2 teams. But I still don't think that this is the best version of Alabama we've seen. Not even close. Now, maybe they're going to get better as the season goes along. We'll see. Now, I do think Georgia's good, but, you know, I still have to see it from J.T. Daniels in a big game, you know, against a really, really good opponent. Him put up some numbers and play really well at the quarterback position. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to see that until they get to Atlanta. I just think that the 3, the 4 spots, I think there's going to be a real battle there, Mark, because I do think you're going to have a mixture of maybe more than a few teams battling for those last 2 spots. I mean, what are your overall thoughts on just the landscape and where we sit right now?
Well, I think that the title of tonight's topic is indication of where I stand. Is that and the way I don't know at what point you joined us, but my first 3 or 4 minutes here was basically stating that we just have a much different situation in college football, and the stage has been set for a much different season than anything we've experienced for 7, 8, 10 years. And it's wide open. So we could go through every conference, and specifically the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Big 12, and they're just setting up much different than they have for years. And I think that changes the complete complexion of the playoff components. When you've got, typically we're sitting here the last week of September, 4 weeks into the season, and Clemson has shown us that they've already beaten a good non-conference opponent, and they've started their track through the ACC and won a game or 2 in the ACC by 40 or 50 points. And we know what the script is going to look like the rest of the way, and that's the way it's followed suit since 2015. So for 6 consecutive seasons. That's not what we've got right now. Right now, we've got a Clemson team that not only looks vulnerable, they've already lost 2 games. So their playoff hopes are basically dead, and their ACC hopes are still very much alive, but they don't control the division anymore. North Carolina State does. Now, do I expect North Carolina State to make their way through the conference schedule undefeated and maintain control? No, but it's possible. It's theirs. We have 2 undefeated teams in the ACC, and their names are Boston College and Wake Forest. So the ACC is a complete, you know, North Carolina was supposed to be the best team in the other division, and they've proven to be anything but that. There is no reason to think anybody can't beat anyone in that conference outside of maybe Duke and Syracuse. Georgia Tech's beaten North Carolina, and they took Clemson to the wire. They took the 2 most talented, best teams, the teams that were prohibitive favorites, and they beat one of them by 3 touchdowns, and they took the other one to a 4th down play at the goal line. Look at that. And then we could make the same, and the narrative is a little bit different in the Big Ten. It's more conventional among all the teams that are supposed to be good. Iowa, Wisconsin, even though Wisconsin's lost 2 games, it's only 1 in the Big Ten, so they're still in the running. And then all the teams in the East. So it's a little bit more conventional, but it's wide open in the Big Ten. If you take what we've seen in the non-conference, and the Big Ten's played more meaningful conference games already than anybody else. If you take that and that cycle continues, then we're going to have a free-for-all. We just saw the team that's considered to be the worst team in the Eastern Division, Rutgers, play fill in the blank, whatever we think they are, probably the 3rd or 4th team in the division, but near the top end. And it was a 1-possession game, and they dominated them in the second half. And so we've already seen this indication that this could be a free-for-all in the Big Ten East. If Ohio State, I made the comment today in recording a Michigan segment that I have more confidence if you're just looking for a team to contend for the Big Ten championship. I have the most confidence in Penn State. I have the most confidence that they are going to be a really good team, 9-3 minimum, most likely 10-2, 11-1. Now, I have the most confidence if you said, is any team in the Big Ten going to win a college football playoff game? I would still choose Ohio State because of the ceiling. But I have the most faith based on what I've seen that Penn State is going to be a contender. And then all those other teams have proven more than capable of beating each other. We could just have just chaos in that division. And then we know how vulnerable Oklahoma has been, and I won't go through all of that, but Iowa State, who's been the darling and the chic pick to break through, well, look at them. and Oklahoma's barely beating marginal teams. This is totally different than what we've seen for years.
Well, I tend to agree with you, Mark. By the way, are you going to give Dave a hard time for picking Iowa State and Wisconsin to win the Big 12 and the Big 10 this week?
Well, I picked Iowa State to win the Big 12 as well. I picked Oklahoma to be I picked Oklahoma to be the best team with the best record, but I picked a upset in the championship game. Now, Iowa State still only lost one game in the they're still in line with my prediction. They got to run the table, but
right.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say I think the Big Ten. I wanted to give just a little bit of thought on the Big Ten. By the way, Mark, I was wondering. I was thinking about it this week because you had made a prediction on Dace's podcast about Maryland being the team that could spring the upset.
Mm-hmm.
And could this be the week, Mark?
Yes,
I mean,
it could be.
Young Tua. I mean, Tua. Throwing the ball around, and they've got some good wide receivers. They could cause a lot of problems this week. I mean, that could be the type of team that could give Iowa a real hard time.
Your defense can only do so much. Your defense can only be so good for so long, and Iowa's defense could show up and be a typical Iowa defense, but you play 60, 70 snaps a game. You can't be your pass rush can't get home all the time. Your corner play, and I think Iowa's probably got I will say the best secondary in the Big Ten, if not the nation. They can only keep up with those guys for so long and for so many snaps that you only need a handful of plays. And if the offense is as bad as it's been for Iowa, then there's your recipe for an upset. You hit 3 or 4 30 and 40 and 60-yard plays in the passing game, and Iowa's not been able to generate offense. Now, I think some of that's been situational, and they've played to the scoreboard and to the opponent. But I have been looking at this game for a few weeks.
Maybe at Iowa looking ahead a little bit. They got Penn State the next week.
Yeah.
So that could also factor into the equation there as well. Yeah, I just overall, Mark, and I've said this from the get-go. The other thing with Ohio State this year is I just think that the Big Ten is better. I mean, I thought I had my doubts about Indiana coming in. Boy, Dace wasn't the only one wrong about Wisconsin. I liked Wisconsin coming into this year, not as much as he did, of course. I wasn't going to pick him to win the Big Ten. But I thought that Graham Mertz was going to be a lot better than he is, and boy, it's not been good there. But you still have Penn State, who looks a lot better. You have Iowa. You have Michigan State, who's much improved. I must admit, Michigan has improved, although not really impressive this past week against Rutgers. Although I do agree with you, Mark. I think Rutgers will at least be a bowl team. I think if they can find a way to get to 6-6, but if you're Michigan at home, you should be able to beat Rutgers by more than a touchdown if, you figure you're going to be a really good team this year. So, I just think the conference overall is more balanced and better all the way around. I mean, just top to bottom.
I agree. I think that outside of Illinois, I just basically recorded a Big Ten power rankings video, and I really think that Illinois is the only team that's bad. Everybody else has shown some capabilities. Shoot, Nebraska took Michigan State to overtime and played Oklahoma to a final possession the week before, and Purdue's winning games, and took Notre Dame to a really good game midway through the fourth quarter. So everybody's shown to be capable at some point. Minnesota, what they did last week, that can't really
Not
be
good.
explained, but they had just beaten Colorado 30-0 the week before.
Yeah, I think it's going to be real competitive this year. It will be interesting to see, if there's maybe some, purging that goes on, and if they beat up on each other, if that's going to be able to produce a playoff team at the end. But yeah, I mean, right now I think Penn State does look good. I mean, Clifford seems to be improving at quarterback. They've got really good talent on defense. Yeah, I'll be interested to see that Iowa game though in a couple weeks. It's always tough to go to Iowa and get a win, so that's going to be an interesting game for me to see, just how good they are. But it's going to be fun to watch, Mark.
Yeah, we may have some 2-loss conference champions.
All right, my friend. Well, it's a pleasure talking college football with you, Mark. You have yourself a good evening.
Thank you, David.
Take care.
All right, let's keep it moving here at the Voice of College Football. Actually, before I take this caller on the line, please hang on just a second. I want to address Falconer X. Thank you so much for the super sticker. And also, Falconer X had asked about Boston College. The Eagles moved to 4-0. They've got Clemson on the road this week. Very interesting. Consider that last year, DJ Uiagalelei led his first big comeback or first performance. That was the week that he took over for Trevor Lawrence, and BC was up 28-6 before he led a comeback. So Boston College coming off a game in which they trailed Missouri late. They won in overtime. Their top running back, name's on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, he gained 175 yards. Garrett Grossell at quarterback. I would have loved to have seen Phil Jurkovich be healthy right now for Boston College, because they've got some weapons like Jalen Gill and Zay Rogers at wide receiver, but they've got to go with a backup quarterback, and they needed him to throw for the first time this season, Garrett Grossell, and he was fairly effective. So my thoughts on BC is that they're actually better, and this is unusual, on offense, even with a backup quarterback, than they are on defense. They could only produce 1 tackle for loss and no sacks against Missouri, giving up a lot of points and yardage on Saturday. So I think BC's a good team. I did pick them to go 9-3. They're at 4-0 right now. They will not be able to make it through. Nobody's going to make it through undefeated there in the ACC, despite Wake and BC having my most ardent, passionate rooting interest. All right. Welcome to the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
Hello, Mark. This is the real MVP. How you doing?
The real MVP. I'm doing well. What's going on with you?
Well, I wanted to answer the question. I think George got most of the teams, but the one major team he left out in the SEC that must be mentioned is Ole Miss. Ole Miss has an average defense and the best offense in the country. And if they beat Bama this week, which a lot of people are picking, myself included, they're right there in the playoff hunt. They're right there in the title hunt.
Well, they've got a lot more games to play besides that, but I get your point. They have set themselves up. If they beat Alabama, of course, that's the best team on the schedule, and it's on the road. So you're telling me that Ole Miss has the best offense in the country. I think they're certainly in the conversation. We tend to forget the most important aspect of any offense, and that's the offensive line. I don't know that their offensive line is at the Oklahoma, Ohio State, Alabama level, but Maybe you can tell me
I
more
give a
about
little
that.
pushback in Alabama?
Sure, you can.
They didn't look so great against Florida. Got pushed around.
Yeah, they didn't run the ball. True.
Yeah, I wouldn't throw them in that conversation with Ohio State.
Well, I wouldn't throw Ole Miss in any conversation yet until they play somebody.
Well,
so
everybody
was
saying Tulane was going to be this world beater team because they played Oklahoma close and they trounced them by 40 in 3 quarters. I mean, that's impressive against any team.
Sure, it is. It is impressive. I was certainly not that person because as soon as I saw 14 points, I took Ole Miss to cover. I had no second thought about that. But yeah, beating up on Tulane, yeah, that's impressive. They did what you should do in that situation as opposed to what Oklahoma did. But that's not proving their college football playoff worth. They will do that starting this Saturday against Alabama. So they got to make it through Alabama, Texas A&M, LSU, Mississippi State, Arkansas. So they've got 5 difficult division games, of course. I don't know who they play besides Vandy on the other side. They always play Vandy, so they get a huge scheduling break there. I think they've got Tennessee. They should be able to win that game. So, yeah. I like Ole Miss. I think Matt Corral's one of the best quarterbacks. And suit with Sam Howell and Spencer Rattler not having the type seasons that they've had. Yeah, they lost their best player on offense from last year, Elijah Moore, but they've replaced him. And Kenny Yeboah as well. I love their running back rotation led by Jerrion Ely.
Yeah, and I think for me, what I think of why I put Ole Miss in that conversation is they've already proven last year that they can play up to an Alabama level. Because last year, I know it was last year, but it was recent. They played them close.
Mm-hmm. They sure did.
But that tells me they can do it. And I think, in my opinion, Alabama looks worse this year, and Ole Miss looks slightly better. Now, does that mean Ole Miss is going to go out there and win? No. But it is an indication of, hey, if Alabama was going to lose a game this year, probably be this one. Especially because Texas A&M doesn't look as good as the AP poll thought of them, but AP poll's garbage anyway, so.
We probably haven't talked about the most important reason why Ole Miss may be challenging for the SEC. We already knew that they had an offense, but their defense is playing well.
Yeah, that's what. They're playing much better than last year. I mean, last year they reminded me a lot of Oklahoma, where they had a world beater offense but no defense. This year, I mean, well, now granted, it's not against great teams or anything, but they gave up 40, 50 points to horrible teams, so it's already a massive improvement.
I would say that their first game effort's pretty substantial, considering that Louisville's going out there and scoring a lot of points against the likes of UCF and some other decent teams, and Ole Miss really didn't give up anything to them until it mattered. When the game in the first half they pretty much wiped them out, and then they gave up some garbage points in the second half, and the same thing with Tulane. 61-21, that 21 points did not matter. So I think they're substantially better on defense, at least based on those two outcomes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And also, I mean, it's crazy to think about it, but, you talked about dark horse playoffs teams, and I was thinking, with how wide open the ACC is, Louisville's got a shot. Louisville's got a shot.
Wait, who's got a shot?
If their only loss is Louisville.
Louisville's got a shot to go to the playoff.
Yeah, I'm going deep in the rabbit hole for this one.
Okay. That's why we're here.
But listen.
Okay.
Yeah, no, listen, they go 11-1. Their only loss is to Ole Miss. Ole Miss is definitely looking like a top 15, top 10 team. And it's at the beginning of the year, which the playoff committee doesn't value as much as a loss late in the year. It's possible.
Yeah, so
what's your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts is that if you're just talking about what could possibly happen based on scheduling, yes, if anybody in the ACC comes through at 13 or 12-1, and wins the ACC championship game, they will probably make the playoff because every one-loss team that's won a conference championship other than 2 have made the playoff. So you give yourself about a 90% chance, but the likelihood that Louisville, as marginal as they are going to make it through even that conference is pretty minuscule. I just think that those teams are all going to beat each other. Those teams are just going to sabotage one another.
With that.
They're all top 40 teams in the country. That's about what they are. They're not even top 25 teams. They're top 40 teams that are just going to, and it's going to be interesting. We might have an ACC championship game with 2 8-4 teams.
Yeah. I mean, that would be a heck of that'd be something.
I'd rather see it than Clemson annihilating somebody in the ACC championship game by 4 or 5 touchdowns. I would love to see a Wake Forest, Georgia Tech ACC championship game that means nothing toward the playoff because they're both 8-4, but hey, why not?
Yeah. Think about how far Georgia Tech stock has risen. First game of the year, they lose to Northern Illinois, and we're talking about them making the ACC championship game.
I know.
I know your previous caller said this wasn't 2007, but man, that'd be a 2007 story.
I don't know. In a way, it's crazier than 2007. 2007 was crazy because the last week or two, all that happened. Teams just kept losing. But through the course of the season, all those teams were winning to get themselves to 10-0, 10-1 in that range. And then we just had a bunch of upsets. And really, when I say a bunch, 3 or 4 that knocked down the dominoes to just make it one of those days where you think it's going to be these 2 teams and then they lose and it's going to be those 2. And then one of those crazy days was more what 07 was. It was a crazy last 2 weekends where this is starting from week 1, week 2, Clemson, see ya, Ohio State, vulnerable. We'll see. Oklahoma. Wow. Okay. They haven't lost, but man, they don't look good against anybody. Nebraska and West Virginia, take them to the West Virginia should have won that game. So we're seeing this from the beginning of the season. Man, the ACC looks like it's just going to be a quagmire of marginal teams. The Big Ten looks like it's going to be
is taking the Pac-12 role.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, there you go. Well, no, the Pac-12 is still awful, but at least it's got Oregon.
Yeah, but what I mean is, like, you had USC beat Oregon State. I mean, you're having that levels of weirdness in the ACC.
Yeah. And then in the Big Ten, their worst issue is that they may have just too many good teams. Like, they're the ACC, but just a lot better. So they may have a lot of good, like 9-3, top 10 to 15 teams, but they'll beat each other, and you'll have a situation where they may knock themselves out as well. And there might be 2 spots for the SEC. There might be Cincinnati, and then there might be a committee decision over, okay, who out of these other teams is going to make it? Is it going to be, who is it? Is it, Oregon would have the lead.
BYU's got a shot now.
Yeah, well, their schedule's so bad.
And that's
yeah, well, they do. They
yeah, but this is a survive and advance type year.
It's looking like it.
I mean, so being 12-0 might matter more than your strength of schedule.
We've got a game coming up in 2 weeks that surprisingly, I don't know that anyone's thinking about right now, but has become an important game. Possibly
versus Baylor.
Bam, there it is.
4-0 versus 4-0. I mean, that is gonna. I mean, they'll both probably be 6-0. I mean, once 2000 craziness happens, but they're both projected to be 6-0. Probably both top 15 teams. College game day could be there. Honestly,
I wouldn't be surprised if Clemson hasn't been able to do it, and they're not going to do it now. They've got 2 losses. It's almost they're basically history. But between, let's say, Ohio State, Oregon, and Oklahoma, that one of them, if not 2 of them, kind of pull it together and run the table and own their conference. But it's just the fact that we already have an elite knocked out. Clemson's already toast.
Yeah.
And now we've got
And
out
the
of the
others are
other
on the
three
ropes.
conferences. Yeah, they're on the ropes already. It's not even October, and they're on the ropes. Man, the Big Ten again.
I know.
If you look at Rutgers being most likely the worst team in the division, they just played Michigan within a touchdown. Look at every matchup in the Big Ten East, and who knows who's.
Yeah, I know. Every week is
everybody can beat there are no bad teams, and there's no, unless Ohio State pulls it together, no elite team. Those games, the probability that anybody's going to make it out of there alive looks slim.
Could we have our first 2-loss team in the playoffs this year?
Wouldn't surprise me.
I mean, that's what it's seeming like we're going down the road. Because we know how much the committee values them conference championships. They stress that every single year. And I can see a Big Ten team being 10-2 and being an over 11-1 ACC team.
Yeah. And if Cincinnati can win in South Bend this week, they have selected the right year to schedule those 2 games and win them, because it looks like it's playing their way.
Well, have you seen any bit of the next year's schedule?
We're going to talk about next year. What about next year?
Well, they've got Arkansas first week of the season.
Really?
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
So they're wanting to stay as a playoff. If they don't make it this year, they're trying again next year. They're not going away. So, finally, I just wanted to ask you, as a Kentucky fan, was George kind of being nervous about Kentucky?
I hope he is.
A little bit of nerves.
He should be. I don't think George knows enough.
Kentucky man, we deserve our respect. But he was like, we got to worry about Kentucky. We can't overlook. Nice. Somebody giving Kentucky respect. Since nobody in the country wants to.
Well, the real MVP, I will say that I did pick Kentucky second in the East over Florida.
I appreciate that. You and a few others are. But in terms of the polling right now this week, 4-0, 2-0 SEC record. Not ranked. Gotta be kidding me. Gotta be kidding me.
Yeah.
And I think there's a shot we can beat Florida just because the first road game for Florida. I don't know. I'm not sure how Emory Jones is going to do in that environment. Possible a few penalties, a turnover or 2. Ball could bounce our way.
That's a 3:30 game, right?
6 p.m.
Oh, 6 p.m. 7 Eastern. Okay. No, it's 6 p.m. Eastern game.
No, it's 6 p.m. Eastern.
That's right, because I did see that, because then they're going to ESPN's going to SEC doubleheader. They've got Auburn and LSU right after that. Yeah. Nice. I'm not going to be able to these games this weekend. This is the only thing that frustrates me about college football on Saturday is I can't watch all the games I want to watch. There's just too many freaking good games on at the same time. It's hard.
I know Cincinnati, Notre Dame, Arkansas, Georgia, and Alabama. All this. Those are some big time games. I mean, this is the week that's going to separate the pretenders from the contenders.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to figure out if Arkansas is legit for a title. Ole Miss hype and Cincinnati or Notre Dame. Cincinnati and Notre Dame's playoff hopes, in my opinion, is probably coming into an end this Saturday.
Notre Dame's is, or Cincinnati?
I have Cincinnati winning.
Okay.
And the reason for that is I believe what Cincinnati's doing, and this is just my opinion, I believe they played so many bad teams in a row, they just get off to a slow start, and they want to kick it in high gear, ram down the team's throat. If they play as well as they did against Murray State in the second half and Indiana in the second half, I think they'll give Notre Dame a lot of trouble. I think they'll win. And also Cincinnati's off a bye. which is huge. Along with Ole Miss against Bama, they're off a bye. And good teams off a bye, it's really hard to beat.
All right, to Real MVP, I appreciate you stopping by. Good stuff.
Yeah, it's good hearing from you, Mark. Good talking to you, and have a great rest of your show.
Absolutely. You have a good night. All right, let's keep it moving here. The voice of college football. Good talk. Some good dark horse candidates there. I like that out of the Real MVP, Ole Miss. That one's serious. That one is legit. The Louisville one, that would be out of nowhere, wouldn't it? But yeah, Ole Miss. I like that selection right there. The way Texas A&M's not playing, I think that's another key factor in this, that Ole Miss is suddenly probably a better team than Texas A&M. All right, who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, it's Will.
Hello, sir. How's it going?
Good. Can we talk some college football, Notre Dame?
Notre Dame. Let's talk some Notre Dame. We just recorded a segment with Brian Driscoll from Irish Breakdown, so be looking out for that.
Oh, I love Brian. Great. I love his work. I'm a regular there as well as here. But I'm just wondering why, like, people don't talk about, like, Notre Dame is the same, like, if they talk about, like, Oklahoma. Because Oklahoma always got, like, they got, the end of the year, they got ranked higher than Notre Dame. And I just don't understand it, especially with their play as of recently.
Well, you might be talking to the wrong guy, because I've got Notre Dame ranked ahead of Oklahoma, because you've done so much against better teams. You've beaten, I don't care what anyone says about their record, even if they lose this week to Michigan, that Wisconsin is one of the 20 best teams in the country. They've just played tough teams, and that's a quality win. Beating Purdue. Purdue's a decent team. They're a top 40 team in the country. That's a quality win. And of course, if you beat Cincinnati this week, Notre Dame has played better football games against better teams than Oklahoma has this year. They should be ranked higher. But I'm not
Especially
feeling good about your
defense.
offensive line and inability to run the ball. That concerns me about that. About you being able
think they took a
to
step
beat
forward
anyone.
this week.
Okay.
Just because they look like Brian Driscoll said, like, they're taking steps. Although it's really slow, they are taking steps to fix the problems, which is a little promising. I'm just wondering about Clemson. Do you think it's because Jeff Scott left that their offense has just been so putrid this year? Do you think that has something to do with it? Because Jeff Scott and Tony Elliott, they just work so well together. And ever since Jeff Scott left, like, their offense wasn't as good against Ohio State in the playoffs. And that was against awful Ohio State. Well, they weren't awful, but for Ohio State standards, they were awful.
No, it's a good point.
I
think it's a good point.
Like,
I do also think that there are about 5 other reasons why Clemson's no good on offense. I think one is that DJ is not the quarter. I think we assumed that he was going to be elite based on his 2 performances last year. And I will point the finger at myself as well, just thinking, okay, he's a top 5 to 10 quarterback in college football. Why? Because he plays for Clemson and they always have an elite quarterback. And because of what he showed us against Notre Dame and against Boston College. And he was recruited at that level as a 5-star. So I just thought that the transition would be smooth and easy. And not that he would be Trevor Lawrence, but that he would be a top 5 to 10 quarterback in the country. So I think that's reason number 1, not necessarily in order, because I think reason number 2 might be the most important reason why they're struggling so much on offense. And that's that the offensive line is just deplorable. It's horrible. Number 3 would be when you go from Travis Etienne at running back to very inexperienced players. Lynn J. Dixon's left the team, and you've got inexperienced freshmen playing running back. I think point number 3 would be go to wide receiver. And even though I really don't blame the wide receivers, they're not dynamic, great Justin Ross is, and he even dropped what could have been the game-tying touchdown on Saturday. The wide receiver plays nothing close to what it was during Clemson's heyday from 2016 or 2015 through 19. So there's a lot of things there. Every positional group on the offensive side, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and offensive line, none of them are close to where they have been at their peak.
And do you think that Iowa's for real? Like, I just think their offense and all just isn't that impressive. And the wins that they had, like Indiana, it could be decent. I know they also played another very strong team in Cincinnati. But like Iowa State just really doesn't look as good as we all thought they would be. And they had to come back to beat Colorado State. Do you think that they're gonna finish strong and like be able to compete with Maryland, Penn State, and Wisconsin who are on their schedule with their offense as weak as it looks against Colorado State?
Oh yeah. I'm not saying they're going to go undefeated and beat all those teams, but can Iowa compete against, with that defense, they can compete against anyone. I do think that their offense is playing to the scoreboard and playing to the situation. I think that they have intentionally played conservatively. I'm not touting them as a great offense. I'm just saying that their offense, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Iowa's offense will see its best days ahead, and they will be a little bit better, quite a bit better, substantially better, not great, not prolific, but functional the rest of the season when they need to be.
Mm-hmm. And do you think if all of the craziness that's going on now, do you think that BYU could have a chance to make the playoffs if like all the teams like lost at least a game? That like Alabama lost a game, Ohio State lost another game, Cincinnati lost a game, and Notre Dame ended up losing a game as well.
Well,
do you think that BYU can make it?
Sure, I think they could make it, but they have to be overwhelming compared to what else is happening out there. They, of course, need chaos in these conferences, and they need two lost champions, and they need to continue undefeated, which I believe their only other substantial game left is Baylor, I guess, and probably Boise State. So their schedule doesn't help them. They typically play the worst. If you consider them a Power 5, they're playing the worst Power 5 schedule typically. And so their best wins as it plays out. And unfortunately for them, the Pac-12's bad, and Arizona State's going to lose some games, probably. And Utah's already lost games, and those are their best wins. So if they could get a really good season out of Baylor and beat Baylor, you know, their dream scenario would be that they beat Baylor and Baylor wins the Big 12.
Do you know why the Pac-12 South is just so bad? Like, is there a reason why they haven't tried to add BYU or another team?
Yeah, I think that mostly happens based on their academic priorities and requirements.
Okay.
And also, you got to understand that any conference that offers BYU has to take on those religious considerations and everything that goes along with that, which I'm not necessarily an expert on, but the Big 12 is obviously in a position where they're desperate and they need the football brand to come in, but a conference that's already well established. But yeah, I don't know how the Pac-12 feels about and what their viewpoint is on some of the things that they would have to take on there.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Okay. Wait. Do you think that USC's like losses this year against Oregon State and against a bad Stanford team, do you think that it will affect at all their coaching? Like which coaches would be able to be interested in the job? Do you think that'll affect it at all, or?
I'm sorry, I
Do you
missed.
not think they'll matter in the
You're
long
talking
run?
about USC.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think anything that USC does on the field this year impacts how that job is viewed. That job is historic.
Okay.
The brand, the tradition, the location, everything involved. I think the only thing that hurts USC is being what hurts and helps USC at the same time, but I think it more hurts them is the condition of the Pac-12.
Yeah.
It helps from the standpoint if somebody wants to go in there and think, you know what, I can clean house and I can own this conference because it's a lousy conference. I think it helps it from that standpoint, but the Pac-12 is always, until things drastically change, is going to be given last consideration for the playoff. The champion in that conference is going to have to prove more than the other conferences. They're going to have a better resume, and you're going to have to get used to being largely ignored through much of the season. Even if you are USC, even USC now gets somewhat pushed to the side and not given quite as much attention as you would think that they would be, because the Pac-12 is what it is.
And do you think that any of the Big 12 teams can go undefeated? Do you think that besides or Oklahoma, of course, like do you think like that the winner between Oklahoma State and Baylor could make a huge jump and be able to go undefeated? Or do you think that's probably not going to happen?
Outside of Oklahoma, I would be very surprised to see any of those teams go undefeated. You know, who are we looking at? Just Baylor and
Oklahoma State.
Yeah, Oklahoma State, who's notched two really good wins against Kansas State and Boise State, and they barely beat Boise State. One of them could walk a tightrope and it could happen, but it's most likely the probabilities of anybody in the Big 12. The Big 12 looks like much like Ohio State and Clemson. If Oklahoma is going to play down like this all year, and Iowa State already is, that becomes a mishmash of teams that are just decent, beating each other.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
Hey, thanks for the call. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
Have a great night.
All right. This as I take this next call, let's look at this BYU schedule. So BYU, of course, is 4-0, having beaten South Florida 35-27 last weekend. They've got Utah State, they got Boise State, Baylor, Washington State, Virginia. They also have Idaho State. That's going to help the playoff resume there in the middle of November. Idaho State and Georgia Southern. And then they've got USC. Yeah. What's going to be fascinating would be to see the playoff committee have to squirm and compare an undefeated BYU team against a 2-loss conference champion, with BYU holding up wins against the likes of Utah State, Georgia Southern, Idaho State. All right. Welcome to the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, this is Blake from Arkansas in Iowa.
How's it going?
I wanted to, it's good. Just getting ready for the evening, getting ready for the sleep. Thought I'd chime in for just a minute.
Sure.
To address the topic of your talk, your previous callers and your segment there that you were just talking about, you kind of diluted my points. I think Oregon, BYU, and Notre Dame probably have the best chance to run out undefeated. Maybe even all three of them could. And I don't see any champion out of whether it be the Big 12 or the ACC or the Big 10 or the SEC going undefeated. So to me, it kind of winds up being, a little bit of a controversial ending to the whole deal. It almost could be those three teams, Oregon, BYU, and Notre Dame. I mean, chances are slim, but it could be a reality where they're in the college football playoff and you end up taking, the champion of the Big 10 or the SEC, whoever's got the better record.
So
they don't.
If I'm not mistaken, you left a comment in the chat with that same lineup. Was that you? So you're saying,
no, I don't believe so.
Okay, so you're saying Oregon goes undefeated. So they win the Pac-12, they're undefeated. They're 13-0. BYU 12-0 and Notre Dame 12-0.
Yes, sir.
And then what else is going on in the country?
Well, I mean, whoever's got the better record probably between the Big Ten winner and the SEC winner. It's going to be difficult. I mean, even if, like only one or two of those teams go in, and you've got maybe a ACC winner that, rises to the top, Big Ten winner or SEC winner. There's so much parity, and it seems like with transfers and this kind of thing that there's going to be a depth problem, maybe an injury problem. The attrition throughout the season in the bigger conferences might end up, catching up to some of these teams.
Yeah. Well,
I guess
the
what
ACC,
I'm saying is Oregon has better than an inside straight shot at actually winning the national championship. The best contender, probably over Notre Dame and BYU, I would say. But
well, I agree with you when it comes to the playoff spot. That the way I see it right now, the ACC is a mess, and these teams aren't even any good. So we're probably going to see like 2 9-3 teams in the ACC championship game. The way things are looking right now,
right.
So they're completely out. In the Big Ten, Ohio State could right the ship and make a run. But even if they do, if they've got one loss and Oregon's got no losses, or even if Oregon's got one loss, they won the head-to-head against Ohio State. So Oregon almost wants Ohio State to win the Big Ten. They might as well, rather than somebody else emerge. But the Big Ten is looking like a supersized, better version of the ACC, where the teams are a lot better, but they're going to beat each other too. And maybe you got a couple 11-2 teams, at the top of the Big Ten, maybe an 11-2 Big Ten champion. The SEC champion, I just can't see any way possible that they're not getting in. So they're in. I just don't. The teams are just so good at the top, and they're going to be given so much preference that the SEC champion is going to be in. So you got an SEC champion, and then Oklahoma's playing down to its opponents and not playing well. And like I said to the previous caller, that looks like a free-for-all too. That looks like the Big Ten, Big 12, and ACC look like three of the same version, but the Big Ten's just the best, and the Big 12's the next one, and the ACC's the worst. The way it's looking now, they've got to start playing conference games, but the way they're playing right now, they look like they're going to sabotage each other. And then maybe you've got your scenario.
Right.
Maybe you've got Oregon, Notre Dame. Wow, wouldn't that be something else? Oregon, Notre Dame, BYU, and the SEC champion in the playoff.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at. They've got. I looked at their schedules; those three teams. And, they're not terrible. They're just kind of average. They're manageable. It's not like they're going to be playing cupcakes the rest of the year, but there's no real big, trip that they could have.
The only thing
it's respectable is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And it's hard to argue against an undefeated team.
Well, the only thing I would say about BYU, though, to compare their 12-0 season, again, it's one less game. They don't play a conference championship game. To compare their 12-0, let's say, against an 11-2 Big Ten champion, I don't know that they would get that. What's their best win going to be this year? Utah? Baylor? They're going to have to hope teams play much better than they are already. Like, they've got to hope that the teams on their schedule are going to come through and be good teams. Arizona State, Utah, USC, and of course, they're all in the same division, so they can't all be good. Baylor, like I told the previous caller, BYU's dream scenario is they beat Baylor and Baylor wins the Big 12.
Do you really think that the committee could actually shut out like a BYU or well, probably not a Notre Dame, but do you really think that they could shut out a BYU in favor of like a 2-loss Power 5 conference champion?
A 2-loss Big 10 champion. If Penn State's 11-2 and they've beaten Ohio State, Michigan State, Indiana, Iowa, Wisconsin, and of course they've got 2 losses and they beat Auburn. As long as those are respectable losses and the scores aren't egregious versus this BYU schedule. Again, I don't know where these big wins are going to come from.
Yeah, my only argument would be they don't have any losses. I mean, yeah, I understand the strength of schedule and that kind of argument, but when you talk about a 2-loss team, even from a Power 5 conference,
sure,
versus an undefeated team,
well,
it would be very, very, very controversial. Let's say,
yeah, oh sure, it would be
for the committee to lock them out.
Yeah, but consider that BYU's schedule is not going to be as good as UCF's was in 2017 and 18, and they were undefeated. And I know that there was not a 2-loss team to compare them to, but they weren't even close to being in the number 4 spot. They were 8th or 9th. I don't even think they were that high one of those 2 years. And Cincinnati was like 9th last year as an undefeated team.
Yeah.
And they played better schedules.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, anything could happen. I'm certainly enjoying the parity this year.
Oh, I am too.
I don't look at transfers a whole lot. I don't look at recruiting a whole lot. But what credit do you give to the transfer portal as far as the parity that goes? It looks like from game to game, there's a whole lot of differential between. I'm not going to say mismatches necessarily, but game planning. Familiarity, I don't know, depth. It seems like the one thing that nobody's talking about is the transfer aspect of this. I'm not sure how many numbers have gone from college to college, but what are your thoughts on that?
When I think about the teams that have been hurt by the transfer portal, though, I'm not thinking of anyone that's a major player in the playoff race typically. Like Ohio State, Clemson, Oklahoma, those teams have not, if anything, they've benefited. And I know Ohio State lost a great receiver in Jameson Williams to Alabama, but he's not why they are struggling right now. That's inconsequential. They've got the best wide receiver room in the country. Tennessee's been ravaged by the transfer portal. Virginia Tech has. The teams that I'm thinking of, I think it's more about this super senior class, that these lesser talented but very experienced teams that don't typically lose juniors to the NFL have this extra layer of really good players that they've been able, really good and experienced players that they've been able to hang on to, while less percentage of those players playing at the likes of the big top 5 schools decided to stay. Those guys were the draft picks in this last NFL draft, while most of those guys at the BYUs and the number of schools that we're talking about across the board stuck around, and they've got a more experienced team and a deeper team than they've had for a long time.
Yep. That certainly makes sense. I grew up in Iowa, but I've lived in Arkansas for, 16 years now. And one of the things that I notice about this state, they're about the same size geographically and population-wise, Iowa and Arkansas. And when Bielema came here, I kind of thought that it was a perfect fit, because I thought Bielema would recruit some of the guys from the Midwest that he was used to getting, the Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois area. And of course, it didn't work out. I think he tried to be a completely different coach, which wasn't wise in my opinion. But Arkansas has started to get high school wrestling. It's starting to get really popular now. They have a Division I college team in UALR, and that was one of the things that has made, probably the primary thing that's made Iowa successful over the years, was being able to recruit big kids that had good balance and leverage, from wrestling. They've never been able to recruit, 4 and 5 star guys, particularly at talent positions, at skill positions. But the thing that they've always prided themselves on was being able to develop, big kids with a good base that are coachable. And to your point, when you were talking about these experienced, age teams, that's the one thing Iowa doesn't have this year. And I would say that for the first time in my life of watching college football, the offensive line, Iowa's offensive line, is probably their worst unit on their team, even below their backfield and their receivers. I think they've got one senior in their two deeps, and he's injured right now. They've got sophomores and freshmen on the line right now, and that might just speak to actually how good the rest of the team is. I don't know what their final record is going to be, but anybody who doesn't know Iowa intimately, might be surprised to know that. The other thing that I would say is I could see Arkansas become a power in the SEC just simply because of that. Arkansas seems to produce, as a state, players, but they've never had continuity or real big names on the offensive line. If they get that, kind of breeding their own talent pool as far as offensive and defensive linemen go, they could be a wild card every year in the SEC just based on that. As well as I do, anybody that's played football, anybody that follows it, offensive line is key. It's your rock, it's the primary, and they could become a force to deal with every single year in the SEC if they can manage to do that. Success breeds success. Then you start attracting talented players from Texas and Oklahoma, the 4 and 5 star guys, and they could be challenging for a championship every year in the SEC if they just do that. Kind of the Iowa blueprint of success, if you will.
Yeah, it's remarkable what Sam Pittman has pulled together with mostly Chad Morris's recruits that couldn't win a game in the SEC. It's pretty remarkable. Well, I appreciate the call.
There was a lot of talk for a couple of years down here about the attitude on the team.
Yep.
I don't know to what degree there was a whole lot of transfers going in and out of this place. I know there was quite a few, but the coach, he can set the tone and the attitude as well, and that makes a big difference as far as young kids go. So.
Yep. Well, thanks so much for the call. We appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Good night.
Up next here at the Voice of College Football, who's on the line?
This is Jeremiah.
Jeremiah, what is going on?
I want to talk about the Longhorns, and I think everybody dismissed them a little too early after the Arkansas game, and I think Arkansas is going to give Georgia a four quarter game this weekend.
They could.
And I think Texas, they look poor in Arkansas, but I think a lot of the problems are starting to get worked out. Now, I don't think Texas Tech is a great team, but
or a
I
good
think they're
team.
a pretty good offense. I think Texas has some of the best running backs in the country. I don't think a lot of people have seen the third string running back Jonathan Brooks, but he looks almost as good as Bijan. We've got 3-star running backs. We've got a receiver coming back off injury. He's supposed to be really good. We hadn't even started hitting that deep balls yet this year, but against Texas Tech, we got really, really close. I think Case Thompson started to get that chemistry with the deep ball. I think everybody is trying to say, "Oh, Texas is gone because they lost the game to Arkansas." I think if they win out, I think it's possible because Oklahoma doesn't look too strong. The rest of the Big 12, Iowa State doesn't look that strong. I think the strongest competition is Baylor. I don't know what you think.
Well, I think that the Big 12 is the third best conference. I think that they're a collection of decent teams, but as we just saw this past weekend, that TCU lost to SMU again for a second consecutive time, and I thought that they might not challenge for the Big 12 championship, but have a really good season. The Big 12 has not shown us anything outside the conference yet, and they're not going to have the opportunity to. Kansas State probably is the best win outside the conference, in beating Stanford, and that's not much of anything there. So I think the Big 12 is the third best conference in America just because the other two are so bad. And I think, like you said, that Baylor and Iowa State, does that tell us a whole lot? Well, it tells us that Baylor is better than we anticipated, and Iowa State is not. But I don't think necessarily that Baylor would win that game, the majority of times, but they did when it counted.
Yeah. I also think that Texas has one of the best new coaching staff, in the country. If you watched the Longhorns last year and the year before that and the year before that, you saw Longhorns shoot themselves in the foot time and time again every single game. They would just waste drives and just holding penalties. Just time and time again, they would just blow drives, blow games. Every game would be razor close. Games we should win by 14 points, we were losing. And I think PK and Sarkisian, I think, have this team playing to what Texas should be instead of playing to not lose a game. And they're cleaning up all the mistakes that have just dreaded Texas this past decade. I don't know what's the difference between what you've seen Texas last year and the year before that in the Sarkisian offense this year.
Well, I saw probably half of the game against Louisiana, and I saw the entire Arkansas game, at least until it got ugly. And I think that Texas still has a lot of work to do along the offensive line. I think their offensive line is pretty bad. I think that they're still not of the mentality to play a physical style of ball in the SEC. I do think that Steve Sarkisian is one of the best play callers, and not just play callers, but offensive coordinators in football, in coordinating the offense and putting together a scheme that works for his quarterback, that is friendly for his quarterback. I don't know if he made a mistake in his evaluation of Hudson Card in August camp and in the spring to make that selection, or Hudson Card just didn't come through when he hit the field, that he's making this change that quickly between those two quarterbacks. I think the one point of optimism for Texas fans would be that he's assembled a really good staff on both sides of the ball. So I think the coaching staff's really good, and I think that they'll be a top rate staff.
Yeah, I have an idea of why I think he switched from Hudson Card to Casey Thompson. Is Casey Thompson, for basically most of the summer, was working with the first team offense until basically last month before the season. That's when Hudson Card started to have a competition. He started getting first game reps. I think he basically had 2 weeks of first team practice before he played Arkansas. And Arkansas looks like, we didn't think their D line was very much, but I think they could be a monster on that D line. I don't know. They just completely destroyed Texas A&M's offense. They couldn't get anything going. They haven't been good all season. They destroyed Texas's offense. So far what we saw Texas offense is they're averaging like 46 points a game. So I don't think Texas offense is bad, and I think Arkansas held them down. So I think Arkansas might be they could beat Georgia this weekend, and I don't really have any doubts about that. But I think we still have a couple more weeks to go. I think we'll know by Red River. I think we'll know if Texas is for real or not. I don't know if you think that's the game that decides that, but I think by then we would know if Texas is going to be a contender for the Big 12 championship, maybe even more by then. What do you think?
Well, I think that is shaping up as the most important game in the conference, where we didn't think it was necessarily in the offseason. But he was looking at Iowa State and Oklahoma. But right now it looks like Texas might be a better challenge at this point. And obviously, even though they haven't challenged Oklahoma for the Big 12 for the most part, except for 2018, they have played within one score of them during this entire time. I appreciate the call. Have a good night.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Up next here at the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
This is Josh from Little Rock.
Hey, Josh. What's going on? Little Rock, huh? Wonder what this
Yes,
is going to
sir.
be about.
Hey, I was just had a 3-1 loss SEC team scenario.
Okay.
What do you think about if Arkansas was to go ahead and just keep it close this weekend, but Georgia, kind of just tops them?
Sure.
All right, then Arkansas runs the rest of their schedule down, beating Alabama, and then they meet Georgia in the SEC championship to beat them.
Sure.
Alabama, Georgia, and Arkansas, I believe, will be in the playoff along with either Oklahoma or, say, Notre Dame.
What if Penn State's undefeated?
I don't see it happening.
Well, I can tell you a lot of things I don't see happening, like your scenario you just played
Right.
out. But
That's why they play the game, right?
sure. I wouldn't be shocked if your scenario played out, but I don't. The
Right. But
possibilities
that's my only, probable way that 3 SEC teams, like people have been talking about going in, it would be.
Yeah, I even if they may be 3 of the best teams in the country, I think it would be unfortunate. I understand that SEC fans don't see it that way, but it's not good for college football to have
Right.
75% of the country shutting the game off. But yeah, that a lot of things are possible at this point. Wake Forest could go undefeated and be in the playoff.
That would be awesome. It really
Yeah,
would be.
I think it would too. I would love to see that. I would love to see some fresh blood.
Yes.
I would love to see
Excellent. That'd be
Arkansas
awesome.
run the table and be in the playoff. Yeah,
I
would.
And going back on
Yep, go ahead.
the guy was saying earlier about, Arkansas and their just having to bring in, keep offensive line.
Yes.
Well, I mean, that's what Pittman does. He's the offensive man when it comes to the line. Ever since he was even here at Arkansas as assistant, that's what he does. We had the largest, line in football, period. The second team behind us was the Buffalo Bills, when he was here. I mean, he recruits well, and he brings them boys in down there in the trenches.
Yeah, he's doing a bang-up job. There's no question about that. It's remarkable.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's looking good out here in Arkansas, and we're really proud. We're loving it, and I appreciate what you got going on too as well. And I'm just going to hang up and see what you got to say.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, let me address the comment on the screen because it's a bit ignorant. I love when people tell me what I'm thinking. Okay, Tyler, here's the deal. Saying it's not good for college football to have 3 SEC teams in the playoff is everyone have a trophy mentality. No, that has nothing to do with it. I don't want everyone to have a trophy. I do not want teams just to be given a place. It's been proven that it's not good for the sport. So what's good for the sport is there to be representation from various conferences because those conferences are connected to the entire nation. And to have the entire nation tuned in to the playoffs and the championship game is better than a collection of like 6 states watching the playoffs and the championship game and the rest of the nation. Now, I'm not talking about me or college football fans that are super fans in Minnesota and Wyoming and wherever else. Shoot, those people are going to watch whatever games are on. But it eliminates 80 to 90% of the country that are fringe college football fans. They're sports fans that just watch the big games and they're like, nope, I'm out. Don't want to see it. Don't care to see it. It's not good for the sport. And when the ratings, the television ratings in those situations have proven to go plummet to nothing, and it's not good for the sport. It has nothing to do with a participation trophy. I want the best teams to be in the playoffs. But right now we've got a system where we don't necessarily determine the best teams, and it's impossible to know who the best teams are. You've got to go with a resume. So those two are mutually exclusive. Those two people that want participation trophies. If we were going for participation trophies, then we would just kind of like, if that were the case, then we would kind of randomly select, or we would alternate. We would say, we would do what the Big Ten did years and years and years ago, that if you went to the Rose Bowl one year, you were ineligible to go to the Rose Bowl the next year. That's stupid and idiotic and eliminates competition. If we were doing what you're suggesting, by just wanting fair representation across the country, then we would just select teams to go to the playoff and say, well, Alabama won last year. They're eliminated. They got their trophy, so we don't want them involved this year because that's not fair. So they're eliminated. Oh, Ohio State can't. They've gone too many times in Oklahoma, and we would allow other teams to play just to be fair. So yeah, those two, wanting the health of the sport versus too many teams from one conference, those are completely different ideas. All right. Hey, Cheryl, how you doing tonight? I see ya. Yeah. Who in the world got in on my account here? All right. Kyle, if you saw, see, I guess I have to explain this every night. If you throw down a super chat, and maybe I'm in the middle of a conversation and not monitoring the live chat here, then I lose the opportunity to post it to the screen. I can still see at the top of the screen, and I went through the whole process the other night, and I turned the camera around and showed you what I'm looking at the monitor. I cannot post your super chat to the screen. I apologize. I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do about it. And so I put a banner that I put up there for about 10 minutes, and it said, "Hey, Kyle, thanks for the super chat." So that's what I did in place of actually posting the super chat, because I cannot post the super chat. So I put that up instead. So if you have anything in particular, Kyle, that you would like me to read off, then you'll just have to type it again. Okay. Yeah, it looks like somebody has like mirrored my account. I don't know where that's coming from. I have to look into that for the time. I'll just have to block that person, I guess. I guess that's what I'll have to do with that. Okay. All right. Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate that. My thoughts on three teams in the SEC. If there was a way to know that those are the three best teams in the country, I wouldn't have a big issue with it. I still, it's not good for the sport. Just not good for the sport. Do we want to see three teams from the Pac-12 in the college football playoff? Well, if the Pac-12 was the best conference, and we could clearly see, we don't play enough games against other conferences. The conferences do not intermingle and do not overlap schedules enough for us to have a read. Now, we can think we know, but Arkansas just playing one game against Texas, and Alabama playing Miami, which that's inconsequential this year, obviously, and LSU playing UCLA, and those one-off games do not in any way prove that one conference is better than the other conferences. Now, I do my conference rankings, and you can look over the course of the games and make a determination, but It's not the NFL where we've got so many games, 17 games scheduled played against 32 teams where we know who the best teams are. They have proven it over 17 games. If this were the NBA or Major League Baseball, well, you've got a more compact group of teams to be able to determine clearly who the best teams are. But we can't do that in college football. So that's why there needs to be some semblance of fair representation across the board. Now, if the ACC continues to implode, as it appears it will, and those teams have played enough football that I think it's pretty obvious to see that nobody's really that good in the ACC. Who's good? The only two teams that have a chance to show us that they're really good would be Wake Forest and BC, because they haven't lost to anybody, but they've got no more non-conference games to show us that they're any good against anybody else. And the other teams, I guess NC State, but they lost to Mississippi State. So really, nobody in the ACC can show us that they're any good because they're only going to play each other. And we have to question those results because nobody in the conference is any good because they keep losing. The Big Ten looks like it's a improved version of the ACC, like really good teams, but not great teams playing each other and beating each other. And it doesn't look like Ohio State's going to separate itself like is typically the case. And nobody else is. Doesn't appear that. Penn State's already won a key game in the conference against Wisconsin. Maybe they will. So we could turn into a scenario, and the Big 12 is the same way. Oklahoma's been very unimpressive. Iowa State's not good. Why was Iowa State the 14th ranked team in the country last week? They had beaten UNLV, who's awful, and they had beaten Northern Iowa by 6 points, and they lost to Iowa by double digits. This is what's wrong on that ranking scale that's so pathetic. And then Iowa State loses to Baylor. So my thoughts about three teams in the SEC, well, if these other conferences become versions of cannibalization and the SEC has three teams, like in that last caller scenario, they clearly define themselves as the three best in the conference, then I wouldn't like it. I wouldn't think it to be good for the sport, but I wouldn't disagree with it because I would say, okay, well, here we've got three teams, and let's say one's undefeated and two have one loss. Let's say, yeah, Arkansas beats Alabama. Alabama beats Georgia. And you've got 3 1-loss teams. And then we've got a bunch of 2-loss champions. That would be difficult to argue, though, that we almost need 3-loss champions in the other conference to justify 1-loss teams in the SEC making it. Because again, what's the proof that those SEC teams are better than the other teams in the other conferences? They didn't play. Nobody played. In the scenario we just played out, Georgia, Alabama, and Arkansas. Think about it. We thought that there was going to be a connection between Georgia, Clemson, and the playoff, but there's not because Clemson's done. So the Georgia win becomes less significant. It's not the win that we thought it was going to be. We thought Clemson was going to be 12-1, and Georgia beat them and could say, hey, we beat this 12-1 ACC champion. But it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. So that we've got to look at the current teams, not the name on the jersey. And the name on the jersey, Clemson's impressive, but the team is not showing itself to be that impressive. So this Georgia win over Clemson, maybe Clemson goes 8-4, and that win just becomes a okay win. It's like somebody else beating Indiana or TCU or somebody. Arkansas beating Texas, who's probably going to go 9-3, 8-4. Well, that's a nice win. It's a good win. But again, we will have no wins by anybody in playoff contention from the SEC where they can say, look, we beat Ohio State and they're the Big Ten champion. We beat Penn State and they're the second best team in the Big Ten. Or we beat Oklahoma and they're 12-1 and they won the Big Ten 12 championship. We beat what was supposed to be Clemson and they won the ACC and went undefeated in the ACC. There's not going to be, all the SEC can say is everybody thinks we're the best, me included, but everybody thinks we're the best, and we played against each other and we produced 3 one-loss teams. But those 3 one-loss teams, who did they beat outside the conference? They didn't beat any elite teams. They beat Texas, Clemson, and Miami. So why should a one-loss team that didn't even win its division get selected over a 2-loss team that won a conference championship? Now, if that conference, again, the SEC, had gone out and beaten a bunch of really good top-level teams in the other conferences, then that would be different. But they didn't. It's not their fault. Those teams didn't turn out. They can't predict when they schedule these games who's going to turn out to be good. Miami, not so good. Psh, Clemson, psh, Texas, eh. But that's the way it turned out. So if you're following my logic, why would a one-loss non-conference champion in the SEC be selected over a 2-loss team from another conference that won its conference when there's no connection between the two conferences to say, well, this one-loss SEC team didn't win the conference or even its division, but we've got all these connector points to show that the SEC's better because they beat all these good teams in these other conferences. They didn't. They didn't. The way things are trending, where are the big wins in the SEC outside the conference? The best win's going to be, I guess it's still going to turn out to be Clemson or Texas. Clemson or Texas. Clemson, Texas. Anybody else? Louisville? Louisville? Really? Clemson, Texas, Louisville. Shoot, maybe Georgia Tech's going to go to the ACC championship game and Georgia's going to beat them. The SEC is the best conference. It is the best conference. I think we can prove that a number of ways. We can prove that by, even though I don't take previous seasons and justify anything that's happening or judge anything happening in this season based on previous seasons. I think once we start the 2021 season, nothing matters from the past. But the SEC has proven itself year after year after year after year after year after year after year. So we can make a wise assumption, a reasonable assumption that the SEC just didn't go off a cliff. So if the SEC was the best in 2020, 19 and 18 and 17 and 16 and 15 and 14 and 13, and even if there was maybe one slate season in there where it wasn't quite the best, it was about that much less, basically the best every season. Well, it's a reasonable assumption. There are reasonable assumptions you can make in life. You can make a reasonable assumption when you see that somebody graduated from Harvard, that they live on the nicest house in town, that they drive Lamborghinis all over the place, that they have money. Now, it could be a complete facade and they robbed a bank or they've got some kind of scam working. That's possible, but it's about a 99% certainty that, yeah, it all lines up and makes sense, and that's what it is. So the same thing with the SEC. The SEC's performance on the field, the results aren't that overwhelming this year. They're still the best, but it's not overwhelming. they're only 6-5 against the other Power 5 leagues. The Big Ten's 8-6. The Big 12 is 4-4. The ACC and the Pac-12 continue to be awful. So they've not been overwhelmingly dominant in these games against the other leagues. They're 32-7. So I got a video that I just released today. So these numbers are fresh in my head. 32-7 against the other conferences, which is the best mark. But again, the Big Ten's record is close. But again, I'm taking that 39 games plus the 11 against the other conferences, plus putting that together with all the things that we've seen year after year after year after year after year after year, both in the postseason and during the regular season and bowl season, and put that together with the recruiting rankings, and then put that together with the NFL draft selections, and you put all that together, it's impossible to argue for any other conference. Now, if the Big Ten stepped up and dragged the SEC all over the field during bowl season in the playoffs, then you could say, okay, we know that the SEC still has all these NFL draft selections and the recruiting, and they've been the best, but this season, the Big Ten laid it on them, so I'm going to go with the results. And I'd be the first one to say, you know what? I'm going to ignore these other things. I'm going to go with the results. And I'm not talking about one game or two games. I'm talking about like it was about 5 games amongst the top 6 or 7 teams. Then we could conclude that, but that's not happening. So that's my long-winded thought about 3 teams from the SEC making the playoff. I am almost certain that Alabama and Georgia are 2 of the best teams in the country, if not the 2 best. I am pretty sure about that. I'm not really sure about anything else concerning anything in the ACC. The ACC may not have a team that's one of the 15 best teams in the country. The way it looks right now, the ACC may not have a team that's one of the 15 or 20 best teams in the country. They may have a bunch of like top 40 teams. I may have to expand my top 25 that actually makes sense to like the top 52 that makes sense. Just to get the ACC some representation, because it's that bad. If this continues where everybody beats everybody, because I highly doubt that Wake Forest and Boston College are going to be undefeated teams. That would be beautiful if that turned out that one of them if one of them lost one game and it was to the other one and that team ran the tip, that would be beautiful. But come on, those teams aren't that good. That's not going to happen. So I do know that about Alabama and about Georgia. And I think Florida and Arkansas, and even now, despite that performance last weekend, Texas A&M's probably still a top 15 team in America, and Ole Miss probably is as well. The Big Ten, I don't know who the teams that are going to emerge and who the better teams are, but I'm pretty sure they're all like Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, maybe Michigan State, maybe still Wisconsin, don't look at that score against Notre Dame. That was not the score of the game. That was not the performance on the field. Iowa, I think like there's a bunch of Big Ten teams. There's like 6 of them. Who knows? Maybe Maryland. Probably not. About 6 of them. They're like 6 of the top 15 or 20 teams in the country. But it doesn't look right now like one of them's one of the 5 best. Maybe Penn State. Maybe Ohio State if they get their act together. But right now, they look like the Big Ten's is really good, but nobody's great. The Big 12 looks like they've got those teams too, but they're not as good. Iowa State, Texas, Baylor, Oklahoma, of course. And they're probably all in the top 20 or 25. And then the Pac-12. The Pac-12 is just a mess. The Pac-12 is awful. The greatest thing that happened for the Pac-12 this year is the obvious. Oregon beat Ohio State. Oregon beat Ohio State. That saved the Pac-12. That saved the Pac-12 from being completely irrelevant. Completely. The league is 16-16 out of conference. That includes beating up on FCS teams, and they should be beating up on Group of 5 teams. Like going 16-16 outside the conference is awful. Awful. Because the majority of those games are against a Group of 5 in the FCS. Like, for example, the SEC is 32-7. The Big 10 is 29-9. The Big 12 is 24-6. The ACC is even like 28-12. Because 50% of those games are gimmies. More than that. You should have an amazing record. But the Pac-12 16-16. The Pac-12's done nothing. UCLA beat LSU. Nice win. We'll see how good LSU is. And then it's all Oregon. Oregon, you are doing everything for the Pac-12 right now. Everything. You own the conference. You are the only that the Pac-12 should get together and call an internal Zoom call and basically say, we've got to give this conference to Oregon. Don't beat them. Don't do anything. Let's fix all the games. No one will talk about us. Nobody will pay attention to us. Nobody will watch us. Nobody will anything. We will be a complete joke. If Oregon loses a game, then we're completely irrelevant. So we got to fix the games. Just let them win all the games. That Oregon win over Ohio State trumps everything lousy that the Pac-12 did, because it at least, like, the Pac-12 could have had a bunch of great results against these other teams and taking care of business, but Oregon lost to Ohio State, and the Pac-12 would just be kind of like, nobody would be impressed. They'd just be like, oh, their records are better, and they've got a few more teams ranked, but nobody's going to make the playoff. All right. I'm just ranting. I gave you some love there. Rob. I gave some love there to real life, the real MVP, I should say. What was I looking at when I said that? I know it's about time to pack it in. Nikki, I don't think Oregon can maintain its level of domination. Plus 12 turnover margin, that usually doesn't hold up. It's not sustainable. So in all that, I know Georgia and I know Alabama, and I know that Arkansas, they haven't proven it to Vegas, apparently, because they're an 18-point underdog against Georgia. 18 points. But what else can Arkansas do with their schedule? They play two good teams and they beat them. They beat them up. So Alabama, Georgia. Then after that, it's anyone's guess. I think Penn State's good. I think Ohio State's very talented. Top 3 talent. Oklahoma, I'm starting to doubt whether they're going to come around. They scored 16 points against West Virginia. They scored 23 points against Nebraska. Now, Nebraska's got a pretty good defense, but it's 23-16 against Nebraska at home. Everybody has a game like that. Even the best teams that have made playoffs have a game like that, but Oklahoma's had 3 games like that already. They've only played 4 games, and Western Carolina was a scrimmage. So 3 out of 3 games, Oklahoma's had the type game that a playoff team usually has one of those. Oklahoma's had 3 against like top 50 competition, not top 10 competition. They've barely squeezed by 3 teams. That usually doesn't get fixed. That usually doesn't change. They've probably have shown us who they are. They're probably going to go 10-2. Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate that so much. You know that. I appreciate it. And I'm sorry about the super chats. And I really don't know why it does that, because I used to never miss getting a super chat to the screen, but now it seems like I barely let it get by, and then I can't get back and pull it back to post it. That used to not be an issue. Tony says Florida is a 10-win team, and to them, that's a natty. Okay. Since they've been weak since 97. Florida's been weak since 97. What about those 2 national championships? Kansas State's better than Oklahoma. Well, if we voted today, Sam Pittman is the coach of the year. Sam Pittman's the coach of the year, and nobody else is even close. Nobody else is close. Who? No. How bad is Ole Miss going to beat Bama? That number threw me off. Wonder what that was. All right. Yeah, the 18 points. The 18 points. I thought it was going to be 8 or 9. That was my guess, and I looked at it, and I'm usually good at guessing point spreads. The real MVP likes Kansas State this week. I don't know if it just seems too obvious as an upset pick, but this Friday night, Maryland, Iowa. All right, everyone. It's great to see everybody here. Oh, do we have 2 calls? Let's make them quick. Rapid fire calls. Here we go. Rapid fire. We're going to do this like Feinbaum. I heard Feinbaum today. I'm watching Feinbaum, and I watch him once in a while. I make myself a little dinner, lunch, or whatever the time frame is. I might throw on Feinbaum if I'm looking for a little college football. And I just noticed, man, I sometimes watch that and think, man, if I ran my call-in show like him, like somebody calls in and says, Eli Drinkwitz, do you think he's the right man to win at Missouri? And Feinbaum just says, well, I know that they lost to Boston College, and Boston College would really like to, Ohio State would love to have that coach back to coach their defense. And you don't go to Boston College and lose if you want to compete in the SEC. Click. And those are the calls right there. That's it. Welcome to the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, it's Danny. How are you?
Hey, Danny. I'm doing well. What's going on?
I was listening to what you were saying. Have to agree. SEC is the toughest right now. They should do. I like your top 25. I like looking at the body of work.
Thank you.
Kind of sick of seeing these conference champions, who go, 11 or 12 and 0. It's like Penn State prior to joining the Big Ten. They would play William and Mary. They'd play William one week and Mary the next. I mean, no wonder you roll up.
You didn't like those Penn State schedules before the Big Ten, huh?
No, they roll up 700 wins playing nobody. So here's
Miami, Boston College, West Virginia.
Here's my idea.
Yep.
Here's the idea. You take the 4 major bowl games.
Yep.
You seed them all 1 through 8. You go ahead and have your bowls, and then you take your top 4 out of that. And if you looked at it right now, you'd have to have Arkansas. You'd have to have Alabama. You'd have to have Georgia. They might even have another one come in, Ole Miss or something. I mean, the SEC is by far the best conference. But you know who's right on their tail, and they're by far number 2? The Big Ten.
Yes.
I mean, if you take a look at even Scott Frost. He says, the first couple of years we were a bad team that could maybe win a couple. Then we turned into an okay team, and he said, you know what, we're a good team who's lost a couple, and he's not wrong. They are a good team. If you look at Michigan's schedule the rest of the way, if they play the way they did in the second half against Rutgers, they could lose eight in a row. And we're talking about what I think is a good Michigan team. So you're looking at who is going to separate from the 8-4, 9-3 up to the 10-2. I take anybody in the SEC that can go 10-2, 11-1, and they'd be in my top 8. And I would take in the Big Ten, Ohio State. They lost at home to Oregon, so that hurts. But listen, they could likely run the table again. So I guess my point is what they want to do is take these 4 teams and let's pluck the champions out of each conference. And you know what? Those champions out of those conferences aren't better than the second or third best team in the SEC or the Big Ten.
I can't really debate that, nor can I confirm it. They don't play enough games against each other, unfortunately. If for as good as the SEC is, or for as good as we think the SEC is, who is the SEC played?
All right, so let's take the Mark Rogers poll right now.
Yes.
Number 1, you have Arkansas, right?
Yeah.
Who do you got at 8?
I believe it's.
So they would play
Florida.
Mark, they would play first. They would play first in one of those bowl games.
Well, these teams have only played 4 games, though, so this is going to look much different.
I understand, but you are at least doing it fairly.
Yes,
you are taking the body of work.
Yes.
You're not saying, Michigan, they've got over 800 wins, so we've got to rank them number 5 when they're not anything close to number 5.
And not to cut you off, I'll just make this one point. You can continue. Oklahoma is the classic example of this. Oklahoma is number 3 or 4 in the country based on absolutely doing nothing this season, except for everybody thinking they were that good when the season started, and they haven't lost, but they've looked like garbage against Tulane, Nebraska, and West Virginia, and they've played like a top 40 team in the country. They haven't played like a top 3 or 4 team, but they're going to be ranked number 3 or 4 in the country because that's what everybody thought when the season started. That's stupid. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Because they're a blue blood.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is an interesting year when you look at what you were saying about Texas A&M and Clemson, and I watch all these teams, man. I watch them real close, and I just wish that they would do the Mark Rogers approach and look at the body of work and go ahead and rank them 1 through 8, put them in the 4 bowl games. And then you've got your 4 left standing.
I'm right there with you, Danny.
That would be a simple ass solution. You'd get. So I don't know. My last comment is I don't know how the Big Ten is going to shake out because they are entirely different divisions. I mean, the Big Ten East is a tough division. And, even if you're an SEC homer, if you don't think that's a tough division, you're wrong. It's a tough division. The Big Ten West, on the other hand, well, I think Nebraska's getting better. I do think Scott Frost is going to get that turned around over there. I do.
Okay. All right, Danny. Anything else tonight?
All right. No, keep up the good work, man. Keep on the body of work. You know, kind of it's like the body of Christ, right?
That's it.
Like
That's
the body of Christ.
There you go.
Okay. All right,
have
buddy.
a good night.
All right.
Have a good
See
one.
ya.
Thank you so much.
You too, man.
All right. We'll take these last two calls right here at the Voice of College Football. Who's up?
Hey, Mark, it's J-Dub calling from Des Moines. How are you this evening?
I am doing just fine. How are you?
Let me throw three letters at you.
Yep.
Just fine. Can I throw three letters at you to kind of advance your argument maybe a little bit?
Yes.
Those letters would be B, C, S. Why can't we take the some of the old BCS formula, and part of the solution you I think rightly point out that these teams aren't playing enough. You don't have a large enough body of work to compare one conference to the other. So go back to the old, what's your opponent's strength of schedule? Look at BYU. BYU goes 12-0. They'd be just as phony as their 1984 championship team was that won the Holiday Bowl over Iowa and got voted the national champion. I mean,
Michigan.
Who have you played? Michigan, yeah. Who have you played and who have they played and what were their records? And factor that in as part of your equation on where you're going to rank somebody. I think I don't know how you would, I don't know what the recipe would be, but I think it is important that you when you look at who you've beaten. Well, you mentioned as an example Georgia. Their win over Clemson. Well, Clemson's turned out to be not very good. Well, let's also talk about who has Clemson played. Well, they're going to end up playing a lot of not very good ACC teams, which I think even weakens the argument even further. So I think there's a whole, it's not it's obviously not the NFL. We're not going to line up a bunch of teams that are 11-5 and play each other off and battle it out that way. And nor do I want it to be that way. But you've got, I think, some way to factor in your opponent's win-loss record, something like that. I think should. What are your thoughts on that? Just factor that in somehow.
Well, we did a live stream during the off season, and I laid out how I would tackle the playoff. And a number of people probably watching have heard this a million times, so I'll try to be brief on this. And I'll probably post another video when we get to the off season. This is how I would do it. The first issue with all of this is scheduling. The scheduling has to be fixed before the playoff can be fixed, because what contributes to the playoff selection more than anything is the scheduling. The scheduling is crucial. So
yeah,
I've displayed and shown a million examples of why the non-conference scheduling is not fair and the in-conference scheduling is not fair. So I've built a scheduling system that makes conference and out-of-conference scheduling equitable. So that's the first thing. So we can't at the end of the season say, goodness gracious, Baylor, for example, has not played a ranked team outside the Big 12 non-conference game since 1997 because they refused to. And right. USC plays the likes of Notre Dame and Alabama in the same non-conference schedule. It's ridiculous. The level of quality of the non-conference scheduling is all over the map. That's because it's placed in the hands of the teams of the institutions. I would take it out of their hands, and we would have a scheduling formula. And I've outlined that elsewhere. So I'm not going to go through the nuts and bolts, but an equitable non-conference schedule. Also, even the conference schedules are not fair and equitable. I would address that. So that'd be the first thing. The second thing is, do we include the group of five or not include the group of five? Right now, we are lost in this malaise in between, this gray area where they're technically considered, but they're really not considered because we've had 3 undefeated group of 5 teams. They never made the playoffs or were even close to making the playoffs. So they're really not being considered. They're really being being insulted and teased by being quote unquote part of the process. So I would have a definitive answer for the group of 5 to say you are being given one spot, or you know what, get lost, go do your own thing. We don't care. See ya. This is a Power 5 playoff. One of the two. I don't care which one. Number 2, it depends on whether we're going to go 8 teams or 16 teams. If we go 8 teams, and let's say we include the group of 5, then I have built a formula in which we would have the with what's going on with the Big 12 right now, that's kind of blowing things up, because I don't know that we can consider the Big 12 to continue in the future without Oklahoma and Texas to be a Power 5 conference. But I'd have the 5 Power 5 champions, and I would have the best group of 5, which would be the team with the best record, which I've surveyed all the playoff seasons, and there would definitively be a one team that has the best record. And in case of a tie, you go to a tiebreaker. And I've gone through all that. I'm not going to, again, go through this at this point. And then you've got 3 wild cards, or you got 2 wild cards under the 8 teams. You got 2 wild cards from the other Power 5 leagues. And again, that would go by record, go by head to head, and go by strength of record. And there you go.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think it's Alabama and Georgia heads and tails above everybody else. I think Alabama will handle Ole Miss. I think Georgia will handle Arkansas. I'm impressed with Arkansas at 4-0, but come and see me in another 5 or 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Let's see where they're at. Let's see where they're at then, after they've got to run through the gamut of the rest of the SEC West and travel to Athens. Beating a Texas A&M team with no offense, and a Texas team just trying to figure out what to do with their second quarterback choice. Those are nice wins, but that's not the same as running through the West of the SEC and then having to play between the hedges.
Yep.
Another thing, just real quick, Mark, I have seen Iowa in person 3 times now with my job. I saw them at Iowa State, and I've seen them each of the last 2 weeks at home in lackluster playing against Kent State and Colorado State. And I will be there on the 9th when they play Penn State. The Hawkeyes have a legitimate defense, but they had better figure out some offense, or they're going to be one of those, like you mentioned, a good team, but not a great one. They could not stay on the field with the likes of a Alabama or a Georgia right now. They've got to find some kind of offense, but they are the prototypical Iowa Hawkeye team. They're the prototypical Kurt Ferentz team. They don't ever do anything to hurt themselves. They're unlikely to make fatal mistakes that will beat themselves. You have to beat them, and they're just going to try to bore you and lull you to death and get you in a low-scoring defensive game that just kind of takes your crowd out of it when they're the away team. Just kind of slows everything down, and then they just kind of that's how they win, and then they beat you with vanilla. That might work in the Big Ten against most of the teams in the Big Ten. How that works against the flash and bang outside, some of the better teams in the country, I'm not sure it will.
Well, I appreciate the call. You have a good night.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mark. Great show as always.
Appreciate that. All right. I will say concerning that last comment, and again, we're at a point in the night that I'm not going to go on and on about to answer these questions. I just want to get your points in. I'm not necessarily going to have a response, and somebody else called in. I'm taking 2 more calls. So if you just called in, please don't waste your time. So I think big games will show us down through history and even recent history, and bowl games and big non-conference matchups and playoff games. Not so much playoff games. I'd have to think through that. Will show us that the teams that we don't necessarily consider to be, because they're strong defensively and in special teams and in other areas that we think, oh, well, they can't compete if they go outside their conference. we've got plenty of examples of those teams then taking that brand of football and being able to apply it against a team that's so-called they're fast and they're quick and they throw the ball all over the field. And there's countless examples of that brand of football holding up. Welcome to the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
How's it going, Mark? It's Tyler from Kansas City, North Carolina.
Hey, Tyler.
I just had a couple different questions, and my first one is basically it kind of bases with your rankings. Like, how do you go about determining like one struggle loss and being like, okay, that's okay, a la Michigan with Rutgers last week, and compare that to say Oklahoma, who's like really kind of struggled through multiple games? How do you go about deciphering those?
Yeah, it's not easy. And that's why I try to state each and every time. I'm not pretending that this is the perfect formula and nobody else can challenge it and it's perfect. And so I just say it makes sense. So the toughest part in it is there always have to be assumptions made. No matter what the rankings, they would have to play, everyone would have to play everybody in the country for us not to make any assumptions. So there have to be some assumptions made. So when week one happens and Georgia and Clemson play, we are assuming that they are as good as we think they are. And so when Georgia wins that game, I credit that as, at the time, I said, that's the best win in the country. Well, right now, it's not the best win in the country. I still think it's a pretty good win. I still think Clemson is ultra talented. I just think they're struggling and they've got issues. So where that win ranks now versus the first week of the season, well, boom, whoever wins that game, they've got the best win in the country. So we make a lot of assumptions about a lot of teams, but fortunately, the more games that are played, we make less assumptions, or we now know that Oklahoma. So, for example, Oklahoma played Tulane in week one. Well, I made the assumption, I made the guesstimation that Tulane was a mid-level American Conference team that typically they go 6-6 or 7-5 and barely make a bowl game, and that's who they are. Well, they went to Norman, Oklahoma, had a fourth down play at midfield, took it to a 5-point game. It was what it was, and I estimated that Oklahoma just beat like the 60th best team in the country. Well, did I know that? No, but you have to start somewhere. But now we're 4 games deep into the season, and what is Oklahoma doing? Well, aside from playing Western Carolina in a scrimmage game, they played 2 other games that basically matched their effort against Tulane. They played a Nebraska team that's 2-3, that's beaten Fordham and Buffalo, and they only beat them by a score at home. And then they play West Virginia, and West Virginia makes 3 gaffes that I can think of that pretty much cost them the game that Oklahoma had no impact on. It was just clearly West Virginia just making mistakes. And they beat a West Virginia team that, okay, well, then we go to the, the next degree of separation is, what did West Virginia do? Well, West Virginia, well, they were good enough to hold off Virginia Tech. How good's Virginia Tech? Well, then you look at their games. And so you just kind of continue to build out that. Now that we go from 1 week to 2 to 3, now 4 games, you can do that. And so when you're evaluating the Oklahoma game against West Virginia, you can say, well, how good is West Virginia? Because Oklahoma really struggled here. Well, they've got 2 opponents that we can measure West Virginia against. They played Maryland, they played Virginia Tech. They split those games. They were both close games. So West Virginia is pretty much a top 30, 35 team in the country, something like that. And you just kind of build it out from there to a certain extent. And then what becomes difficult is the first week for me to do this was fairly easy. Then it becomes more complicated the further we go through the season, because I not only have to do that, but I also have to think, okay, way back in week 1, Iowa beat Iowa State. Well, I wasn't quite as high on Iowa State as everybody else or a lot of people were, but I still thought they were a really good football team. Well, maybe they're not quite as good. So some guy commented to my top 25 this week, and he was like, "You're an idiot. You dropped Iowa from number 1 to number 5. How in the world does that take place?" Well, in the world of traditional polls like the AP and the coaches poll, what we're used to, it doesn't happen because these teams basically get to their spot and then they hold it unless they do something stupid. Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense because you're not taking into account what else is happening in the country, and you're not taking into account that a win or a loss that they had 3 weeks earlier, 7 weeks earlier should be measured differently than it was at the time. And so in taking account Iowa's win against Indiana, not as good as what I considered it to be at the time. Iowa's win against Iowa State, not as good. Iowa struggling against a Colorado State team in that particular win. But it's not done in a vacuum. I got to compare that against, well, Georgia just went out, and I know beating Vanderbilt is not a big deal, but they didn't beat them like Stanford beat them, like 41-24. They completely annihilated them off the face of the earth. Had more points than Vanderbilt had yardage. They did what only a few teams in the country could do to Vanderbilt, and the same thing with Alabama. So, and then looked at the previous games and said, okay, well, Georgia also did this to South Carolina. South Carolina just showed that they could play neck and neck with Kentucky for 4 quarters. So I'm kind of going through the whole puzzle and just making logical, reasonable estimations.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, Rick. I was just curious as to how you took those into account because, like I said, or Ryan said, but I think your top 25 is probably one of the better put together that I've seen. So I was just, like I said, just more so curious than anything as to how you felt with that, and how you take some of those games into account. And then my final question is, how do you feel? I guess what are your opinions on Rutgers, especially after what we saw last week? I feel like that was Michigan kind of not really playing up their potential, like letting off the gas and not making the proper adjustments as a Michigan fan. How do you feel that's going to carry over this week in Piscataway with Ohio State?
I still think Rutgers is the worst team in the division, but I think they're a very capable team in that they're a sound football team. They tackle on defense. They're strong up front. They move the ball adequately against Michigan, not because they've got a great quarterback or they've got decent weapons, but basically because they were pretty stout up front and they moved out Michigan's defensive line fairly well in the second half. And so I think Greg Schiano is building this team from the core out. He's building good line play. And of course, he's gone to the transfer portal. And I think Rutgers is a very solid team that we will probably see go 2-7 or 3-6 in the Big Ten. And hopefully they go 3-6 so they can make a bowl game, and they'll play in the lowest tier Big Ten bowl game, probably in Detroit, and they'll be a tough out for somebody. I think that's about where they are. So yeah, Michigan underachieved in that game. I would think that if they played Rutgers 10 times, that they may lose one of them. But that most of the wins would be more substantial than the one that they showed us this week. They can't be playing like that every week against, somebody like Maryland.
No, not at all.
Is going to hit them with a big play or two. And, Rutgers, like I never had that. I didn't really watch the first half. I forget what other games were on that I really wanted to see, like Texas A&M and Arkansas. And then the second half.
Yeah, there were plenty that were better.
Yeah, like Florida and whoever else was on. Anyway, and so I, but I got interested in the second. Once I saw that score go to 20-10, and then I may have switched at that point and started paying attention. That without Rutgers just not having a dynamic offense, I thought it's going to be tough for them to drive from their 25-yard line and put together a 75-yard drive to tie this game. Otherwise, I would be even more intrigued by this. But I still hung around because I thought if a play happens here, then we may be in for another upset here.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of piggyback on that, I think that, as you said, Rutgers is very competent as a team in general, and Gianna's did a great job. Offensively, they brought a lot of different motion packages and ran the ball well. And that's something I've just seen Ohio State struggle with week in and week out, minus last week against Akron. I mean, I was curious if there was any thoughts you had or worries you had for Ohio State in that regard. The way they were, like I said, motioning. They're not going to hit you with a big play, but just kind of, as the guy said about Iowa, kind of bore you a little bit, just moving the ball nickel and dime, and then finally put points up.
Yeah, we actually might have seen a preview of that a little bit in watching Rutgers and Ohio State last year. I completely dismissed that outcome, but Rutgers gave Ohio State some fits for about, some time into the third quarter and hit some big plays and put up some points. All right. Well, I appreciate the call.
But anyways, I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate your time, especially this late at night. So
sure.
Have a good one, and enjoy the next week of football.
You too. Absolutely. All right. Let's wrap it up with this one. Welcome to the Voice of College Football.
What's up, Mark? My name's Tyler, too. I'm actually the one in the chat who kind of got you amped up earlier about the 3 SEC teams.
Okay.
Calling it.
So I don't know that I did a very good job of really getting to where I was at. I want the 4 best teams in the country to be playing in the play. If the 4 best teams in the country all played in Pennsylvania, if it was Pitt, Penn State, Temple, and I don't know, Duquesne, if they were the 4 best teams in America, that would be fine. I just don't think it would be good for the sport. But I want the 4 best teams. And when I say that, I mean the 4 teams that earned it, because I am of the opinion that we don't know who the 4 best teams are. So we have to go with the resume because we don't know who they are.
For sure. Like, I feel like a lot of people, I'm not saying you, but I feel like a lot of people kind of base it on region. So, like, in a perfect world, it'd be like a Pac-12 team because of the West Coast. And then you have, like, the Big 12, Midwest, and then SEC. And then you'll have, like, the Big 10 get the East Coast. But the problem is, it's like, you could say that, like, in fairness to, like, the entire world, that you want, like, those 4 different conferences in. But the problem is, like, it might be better for television ratings, but at the same time, is it better for, like, the realness of this sport? You want the best teams to get in regardless of the conference, correct? So, like, if you had, let's say, Wake Forest, even though obviously I think they're going to lose like 3 or 4 games, but let's say Wake Forest gets in, and then you have Alabama and Georgia, and then let's say another Southern or Texas team gets in, that's still, like, taking away a huge chunk of the country, So, I mean, it's hard to say just based on conference that, the SEC doesn't have the best teams regardless.
Okay.
Is my argument, I guess.
Sure. Well, I'm not making fun of your argument in any such way because it's been made by other people, and I get it too, but let me put it this way. Why don't we have a bunch of NFL scouts come in and tell us who the best teams are? They can watch the games on tape. And like in 2015, like if we took your approach to the nth degree, in 2015, let's say, for example, I don't know if you were watching the sport at the time, but in 2015,
that was, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so Michigan State won the Big Ten. Michigan State was not the best team in the Big Ten. Anybody could clearly see that. They lost to a 5-7 Nebraska team. They only beat Michigan because the Michigan punter dropped the punt snap and threw the ball like a fool up in the air with no time on the clock. They lucked into a couple wins. Ohio State had an NFL team. Shoot, they had a future NFL rushing champion and receiving champion on the team. They had the Bosa brother, the whole thing. So we could say, the committee could say, we don't care that Michigan State beat Ohio State and they won the Big Ten championship. We just think Ohio State's better. We know they're better, so we're just going to put them in the playoff. Would that be right? No.
Yeah, that's fair.
it's
Yeah, you're fair. I mean, there's definitely an argument based on like eye test compared to resume, compared to this, compared to that. It's just it's hard to get to that point, and obviously it's subjective by anybody who views it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So that's what makes it difficult. At what point do you say, I've run the numbers on all these non-conference games that have been played, and I don't think there's any question that the Pac-12 is lagging. It's just a horrible league right now.
Yeah.
But if Oregon wins all those games in the Pac-12 and they beat Ohio State, I don't think we can say you're out. It just wasn't good enough. The games have to count for something.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Clemson in a lot of years. I mean, Clemson can't help that they play in a bad conference. Doesn't mean they're not one of the 4 best teams. Like it's just is what it is, I guess. But I don't know. It's definitely subjective depending upon who you ask or what you're viewing. But I just was wondering if you're basing it, like when you say it's bad for the sport, are you basing it on region or are you basing it on conference? Like, is it bad because 3 SEC teams are in, or is it bad because, you don't have the spread of the teams throughout the country?
Well, the conferences do basically represent regions. The SEC is in the Southeast. The Big Ten is in the Midwest. The Pac-12 is in the West, etc. So they do represent regions of the country. It's been shown that if there's not representation that's broad spread across the country, that the playoff ratings and the TV ratings in the playoffs and championship games suffer tremendously.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's fair. It's kind of like if you had, I'm not even going to say, so like, let's say South Carolina was elite and Clemson was elite, and let's say both of those got in because they were the best teams, but they're basically in the same region. So wouldn't that be bad for the sport, just the same as 3 SEC teams getting in compared to teams throughout the entire country?
Yeah, let's just face it. Some teams are more popular than other teams.
True.
If you look at the top 10 rated TV games every year, they're all from the SEC and the Big Ten. That's just the way it is. They are. And almost the SEC is a little more spread out, where the Big Ten, it's basically Ohio State, maybe Penn State and Michigan. That's it. And those are the highest rated games of the college football season. So if Ohio State's not there and there's nobody from the North, and, maybe Michigan or Notre Dame, and obviously Michigan's been nowhere close, or Notre Dame, then, you're just taking, and again, we're talking about the masses of millions of people. We're not talking about Joe Blow, college football fan in the middle of Chicago who will watch anybody play because he loves college football. We're talking about the fringe college football fan, NBA fan, NFL, baseball, watches whatever, but it's kind of got to hit him right. And if he's like, well, that's Georgia and Alabama are playing, and I live in Washington State, I don't care, then he tunes out. As opposed to, well, yeah, Oregon just lost in the semifinal, but they barely lost, and Alabama beat them. So maybe I'll watch this game too, since I got a little familiar with Alabama watching them beat Oregon.
That's fair. That's definitely fair. That's why I think, like, obviously, like, an expanded playoff makes sense in a lot of ways.
Yes.
That way you can kind of have a combination of, maybe getting, in my, like, a prospective best team in comparison to getting the entire country. So I just wanted to get your perspective on that. I appreciate the call.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. You have a good night.
You too. Have a good night. Appreciate it. All right. Well, I have stated that I was taking 3 more calls and I took 4 more calls. There's still other people waiting. So I appreciate you calling. We have to cut it off at some point. Unfortunately, I cannot do what I've done in certainly past years where I just crashed until whenever I got up. No, I need to get up at fairly early time in the morning, around 8 in the morning. So we will be back throughout the week I've got a ridiculous schedule of records tomorrow. Let's see. We will have our Miami show at 1 o'clock on the Miami channel. And we also, let's see, tomorrow, I am recording on Tuesday. Texas A&M, Virginia, Michigan, USC, Texas, Alabama, and doing live streams with Miami and Nebraska. And I also want to post my SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, and ACC power rankings. But I appreciate everybody being here as always. Thank you so much, and I apologize to those people that called. But and I apologize especially if you did not hear me say that I was going to take 3 more calls, and I took 4 more. And there's a few more people on the line. So please call back. We will be back here throughout the week. Possibly on Wednesday night would be the next time to take calls, but definitely either on Thursday, I think might be a good time to do a call-in show. And then we'll do something Friday before and after Iowa and Maryland. I think that's going to be intriguing. So that could tell us a whole lot about the Big Ten going forward. All right, folks, appreciate it. Lock it in here at the Voice of College Football. Please subscribe, hit the like button on your way out as well. Good night.